I have stood a great many posts in the house of Harrowgate, and I have learned that the quiet ones are the ones that break a man. Give me a riot at the gate, a mob of tourists with their phones raised, a drunk lord swinging his fists. I know what to do with noise. It is the still posts that undo you, the empty lane, the locked door. The hour when nothing at all is meant to happen, and the whole weight of the crown rests on whether one man will move when he is told to move, or hold when everything in him wants to yield. That is the post I want to tell you about. Aldergrove Cottage, on a gray morning at the tail of autumn, when the Queen Consort came up the gravel with 3 attendants behind her, and a set of keys already in her gloved hand, and Sergeant Halloran Weir put himself in the doorway and would not let her in. My name is Corporal Denby Rook. I was 6 paces behind him when it happened, close enough to hear the gravel stop crunching under her boots, close enough to see the color leave the face of the steward who trailed her. I have replayed that morning more times than I can count, and every time I understand a little more why the whole house still speaks of it in a lowered voice. But let me start where I stood, and let you feel it the way I felt it, because the reason that stunned everyone, the reason that is the whole point of this, does not land unless you first understand exactly how impossible his position was. You have to understand what Aldergrove is first. It is not the great palace. It is not where the king holds court or where the state banquets fill the long gallery with light. Aldergrove Cottage sits 1.5 miles from the main house, at the end of a lane of old lime trees, behind a low stone wall that a determined boy could climb without much effort. From the outside it is nothing gray stone, a slate roof gone soft with moss, a green door, chimneys that lean. A gardener's cottage, you'd think, or a dower house fallen out of use. Tourists never see it. It is not on any map the public reads, and that plainness is exactly why it matters, though I did not know the whole of why until that morning was over. The late Queen Isolde had loved it. That much everyone in the house knew. In the years before her illness, when the Crown Prince Rowan and Princess Alara were small, Queen Isolde had taken them to Aldergrove in the summers, not with a train of nurses and secretaries, but nearly alone, the way a mother takes her children somewhere that is only theirs. There were stories among the older guardsmen of the Queen kneeling in the vegetable beds with dirt to her elbows, of the young prince learning to fish in the brook that ran behind the wall, of lamps burning late in the low windows while she read to them. When she died, the cottage was shut, not sold, not stripped, not given to anyone. Shut and kept and quietly guarded, one man on the door in the daylight hours, the locks changed, the curtains drawn. King Alaric had given the order himself in the first raw month of his widowhood, and no one had ever thought to question it. It simply was. Aldergrove was closed. Aldergrove was Queen Isolde's, and the house, out of a decency it did not always show, let it stay so. Then King Alaric married again. Queen Consort Morwenna was not a cruel woman on the surface of her. That is the thing people get wrong when they tell this story second-hand. They make her a witch out of an old tale, and she was not. She was worse in a way because she was reasonable. She smiled at the right moments. She learned the names of the grooms and the cooks and asked after their families. She had a voice you could listen to for an hour and come away feeling you had been treated with warmth. But underneath the warmth there was a hand always closing slowly on everything the late Queen had left behind, the jewels first, then the horses, then the disposition of rooms in the great house, the portraits, the placement of Isolde's name in the order of the chapel prayers. Not seized, rearranged, improved, modernized. Every removal came wrapped in a reason so sensible that to object was to seem the unreasonable one. That was her gift, and it was a dangerous one. And by that gray autumn morning she had turned it, at last, toward the one thing in the house that had been left untouched. I had been assigned to Weir's watch for 11 months by then. He was a sergeant of the household guard, a man of perhaps 50, with gray coming into the close crop of his hair, and a stillness on post that the younger men tried to copy and could not. He was not a talker. In the months I served under him, I do not think he told me 100 sentences about himself. I knew he had a wife who had died young, and a stretch of service in the border regiments before he came to the house, and a way of standing a door that made you feel the door was a thing worth standing. That was nearly all. He was not warm the way Morwenna was warm. But there was something in him that did not close on anything and did not let go of anything either. And by the end of that morning, I understood that this was the more valuable thing by far. The order to open Aldergrove had come down 2 days before, and it had come from the Queen Consort's household, not the King's. That mattered, though at the time I did not know how much. A steward named Pruett brought it, a soft, anxious man who carried other people's decisions the way a mule carries a load, with no opinion of his own about whether the weight was right. He came to the guardroom with a paper. The cottage was to be aired, he said. Assessed. There was talk of restoring it, opening it for use, perhaps as a residence for one of the younger members of the house. The Queen Consort wished to walk through it herself and see what was wanted. The guard on the door was to admit her party when she came. Weir read the paper twice. I remember that. He read it once quickly and once slowly, and then he set it down on the guardroom table and said, "Whose seal is this?" "The Queen Consort's household," Pruett said. "Not the King's." "The Queen Consort acts with the King's confidence in all matters of the house," Pruett said, in the tone of a man reciting something he had been given to recite. "That's not what I asked," Weir said. He was not sharp about it, he was never sharp. But he had a way of laying a question down and leaving it there, unmoved, until it was answered, and Pruett had no answer. So he shifted his feet and looked at the window and said the Queen Consort would come Thursday morning and expected no difficulty. When Pruett had gone, I said, "You're troubled by it." "I'm troubled by everything that comes with the wrong seal," Weir said, and that was all he would say. But that evening I saw him do something I had not seen him do before. He went to the house archive, not the great muniment room where the charters are kept, but the smaller registry where the standing orders of the guard are logged, the plain book that records which post is held under whose authority and why. He was there past the lamps being lit. I did not go in. I thought he was being thorough, the way careful men are thorough, and I thought no more of it. I did not understand yet that he was not being thorough. He was remembering something. He was going to look at a thing he already half knew, to be certain of it before he staked everything he had on it. Thursday came in gray. There had been rain in the night and the lane was dark with wet, the lime leaves plastered to the gravel, and a low mist sitting in the fields beyond the wall so that the great house was only a suggestion behind us. Weir took the door at first light. I took the position at his shoulder and a half step back, which was mine to take, and we stood. The cottage behind us was silent and shut, the green door at our backs, the drawn curtains showing nothing. For 2 hours nothing happened but the drip of the trees and the far-off call of rooks. I have stood 1,000 such mornings. I did not know this one would be different from all of them. Then near 10, we heard the motor cars on the lane. 2 of them coming slow over the wet gravel, and the sound of them was wrong for a cottage that no one used. Weir did not turn his head. He never turned his head. But I felt him settle, the way a man settles his weight before he takes hold of something heavy, and I understood that whatever he had gone to the registry to be certain of, he was now certain of it, and he was going to stand on it. The cars stopped at the end of the lane where the gravel widened. Doors opened. And the Queen Consort came up toward the cottage on foot, in a coat the color of claret with the collar turned up against the damp, and she was, I will grant her this, a striking woman, tall, unhurried, entirely at her ease, walking up the lane of a house that had been shut for love of a dead woman as though it were a room in her own wing. Behind her came Pruett the steward, pale already, and a woman of her household I did not know, and a man carrying a leather case who had the look of a surveyor or an appraiser. And in her gloved hand, plain to see, she carried a ring of keys. She stopped 4 paces from the door. She looked at Weir, and then at me, and then at the green door behind us, and she smiled the warm smile that had disarmed half the house. "Good morning, Sergeant," she said. A miserable one for standing about. You'll be glad to be relieved of it, I think. We won't be long inside." And she came forward to pass him, as one passes a piece of furniture that is only in the way by accident. Weir did not move. I want to be precise about what happened, because the whole house got it slightly wrong in the retelling, and the small facts are what make it what it was. He did not raise a hand to her. He did not speak first. He simply did not move out of the doorway, and his not moving was so complete, so absolute, that the Queen Consort's forward step brought her up short a half pace from him, close enough that she had to tilt her chin to hold his eyes. And in that half pace of nothing, the whole morning changed its weight. "Sergeant," she said again, and the warmth had thinned very slightly, the way ice thins where the water moves beneath it. "You have your orders. You were told I would come." "I was told, ma'am," Weir said. "Then stand aside." "I cannot, ma'am." I felt the cold go up my own spine at that, and I was not even the one saying it. To refuse an order in the house is a grave thing. To refuse the Queen Consort at a door, with witnesses, with her keys in her hand, I had never seen it in all my years. Prouette made a small sound behind her. The surveyor with the leather case took a step back, as though the ground under Weir might be unsafe to stand near. Morwenna's smile was gone now, though her voice held its evenness a little longer. "You cannot," she repeated. "You are a sergeant of the household guard. I am the wife of the king. This is a residence of the house, and I have come to inspect it. There is a paper, Prouette, the paper," and Prouette fumbled the folded order out of his coat and held it up with a shaking hand, and she took it and held it toward Weir like a shield. "There is a written order, under my household seal. You will admit me, sergeant, or you will be removed from your post and answer for it. Which will it be?" And Weir, I will remember this until I am an old man, Weir looked at the paper she held and looked back to her face, and said, in the same plain, unhurried voice he might have used to tell the time, "That door does not open on your seal, ma'am. It has never opened on your seal. And by the standing order under which I hold this post, it will not open until the man whose seal closed it says otherwise. I am sorry to be the one to tell you so, but I will not be the man who let you through." The mist dripped off the lime trees. Somewhere behind the wall the brook ran on over its stones, the same brook a small prince had once learned to fish in, though I did not know that yet either. And the Queen Consort of the House of Harrogate stood 4 paces up a wet lane, held out of a shut cottage by one gray-haired man who would not move, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw her at a loss for what to say. It did not last. Women like Morwenna are never long at a loss. But in the seconds it lasted, I understood that we had crossed into something none of us could take back, and that whatever Weir knew, whatever he had gone into the registry to be sure of, it was going to have to come all the way out into the light before this morning was done. And when it did, it would not be the small quarrel over a cottage that it looked like from the lane. It would be something that reached all the way back to a dying queen, and all the way forward to a promise a nation did not know had been made. But I am ahead of myself. Let me tell you what she did next. She stepped back. That was the first thing, and it told me a great deal about her, because a lesser antagonist would have raised her voice, and Morwenna did the opposite. She stepped back a half pace out of the closeness she had forced, and she let her shoulders drop into an easier line, and she looked at Weir with a new expression altogether, the expression of a reasonable person confronted with an unreasonable obstacle, deciding to be patient with it. It was, I would learn over the next hour, the most dangerous thing she could do. She was not going to shout him down. She was going to be gracious and correct and slow, and she was going to build the case that he was the mad one, until the whole house believed it and he was swept away by the sheer plausibility of her being right. "Sergeant Weir," she said, and I noted she had learned his name or been given it, which meant she had thought about this beforehand. "I understand loyalty. I honor it. You served the late queen, or you served under those who did, and it is right that you should hold her memory dear. No one asks you to forget her, but loyalty to the dead cannot become disobedience to the living. The king is your master now, and I am the king's wife, and this is the king's house. You are not protecting Queen Isolde by keeping me on a wet lane. You are only embarrassing yourself and me and forcing a scene that neither of us wants." She let that settle. "So I will ask you again gently, and I will forget that the first refusal ever happened. Stand aside and let me do the simple, ordinary thing I have come to do." It was beautifully done. I felt the pull of it myself. Everything she said was true, or near enough to true that the falseness in it did not show, and if Weir had wavered even a little, if he had let a flicker of doubt into his face, she would have had him, because a guard who is unsure is a guard already halfway to yielding. But Weir did not waver. He had gone into that registry 2 nights before for exactly this reason. He had made himself sure so that he would not have to become sure now, in the wet, with her warm voice working on him. "Ma'am," he said, "you have not asked me why." Morwenna blinked. "Why what?" "Why the door does not open on your seal. You have told me I am loyal to the dead and disobedient to the living, and embarrassing myself. You have not once asked me what standing order I hold this post under, or who said it, or what it says. If I were only a stubborn old man who loved a dead queen, you would be right to be patient with me. But I am not refusing you out of love, ma'am. I am refusing you out of the order I am sworn to, and you have not yet asked me what the order is." That stopped her. I saw it stop her. Because it is one thing to be defied by sentiment, which can be soothed or waited out, and quite another to be defied by a rule. A rule has an author, and the author might be someone she could not simply outlast. For the first time a real caution came into her eyes. "Very well," she said slowly. "Tell me the order then, since you insist." "I would rather tell it in front of the king, ma'am," Weir said. "It is not a thing I hold the right to explain on a lane, but I will tell you this much, so you understand I am not being difficult for its own sake. This cottage was not simply shut. It was placed under a standing protection, entered in the registry of the guard, sealed by the hand of the king himself in the first month after Queen Isolde died, and the protection has a condition on it. The door opens for the king if he comes himself, or on his direct written command under his own seal. It opens for the crown prince when he comes of the age the order names. It does not open for any other member of the house of any rank on any household seal for any reason until one of those 2 conditions is met. Not for a minister, not for a steward, not for the queen consort. That is not my invention, ma'am. That is the order in the book in the king's hand. I am the door. I do not get to choose." There was a long silence on the lane. The surveyor with the leather case had gone quite still. Pruett the steward had the look of a man who had carried a load up a hill and only now discovered it was full of something that could explode. And Morwenna stood very straight in her claret coat, and I watched her recalculate. I watched her, behind the composed face, understand that this was not going to be a matter of overruling a sentimental sergeant, but of confronting an order set by the king's own hand, an order she had not known existed, an order that named her out of it by category. That is a hard thing to hear standing in the wet. She hid it well, but I saw it. "An order the king never told me of," she said at last, and there was something new in her voice now, something wounded and cold at once. "How convenient that the one man on this door should be the one man who claims to know of a secret order that keeps the king's own wife out of a garden cottage. Do you know how that sounds, Sergeant? It sounds like a servant who has decided he is the guardian of a shrine and has invented a scripture to defend it. There is no such order. Or if there is, it is a scrap of paper from a grief-stricken month 5 years gone, that the king himself has surely forgotten, that was never meant to bar his own household. You are hiding behind a ghost." "Then let us go to the king, ma'am," Weir said, "and ask the ghost whether he remembers." I think that was the moment she decided to destroy him. Not to win the cottage, she was too clever to keep pushing at a locked door in front of witnesses, but to destroy the man, because he had made her recalculate on a wet lane in front of a steward and a surveyor and a corporal, and women like Morwenna do not forgive being made to recalculate. She gathered herself. She smiled again, and this time the smile was terrible because it was entirely calm. "You are quite right, Sergeant," she said. "We should go to the king. I would not dream of forcing a door against a man so certain of his conscience. It would be beneath me." She turned to Pruett. "We're finished here for today. The sergeant has been very clear." And then back to Weir, in a voice pitched so that all of us would hear it and remember it. "But understand me. I will go to the king, and I will tell him that his guard refused his wife entry to a cottage, and cited an order no one has seen, and would not step aside though a written instruction was placed in his hand. And when the king asks why, as he will, the whole house will be watching to see whether Sergeant Halloran Weir was a loyal man protecting the crown's own command, or a proud one who mistook a shut door for a throne. I hope, for your sake, the order is real. Because if it is not, if you have stood here this morning on a thing you half remember and half invented, then you will have refused the Queen for nothing, and there will be no post in this house, nor any other for a man who did that." She let it hang. "Good morning, Sergeant." And she turned and walked back down the wet lane to the motor cars, unhurried, her collar up as though she had won something, and perhaps in the arithmetic of the house she had, because she had turned a locked door into a trial of the man who locked it. The cars pulled away. The lime leaves dripped, and Weir and I were alone again at the green door in the mist, with the brook running behind the wall. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, without turning, he said, "You heard all of that, Rook?" "I did." "Then you're a witness, whether you want to be or not. Remember it exactly, not what you think happened. What happened, the words, who said them, it will matter." "Sergeant," I said, "is it real, the order?" He was quiet so long I thought he would not answer. Then he said, "It's real, but being real won't be enough. She's right about one thing. A shut door and a 5-year-old paper, that's a thing the house can talk itself out of if it wants to badly enough, and she'll want to badly. She'll go to the king and she'll wrap it in reason, the way she wraps everything, and she'll make it about me, about a proud sergeant who forgot his place. And if that's all this is, a paper against her voice, she wins. Her voice is better than any paper." He was silent again. "So it can't be only that. She has to be made to ask the one question she's too clever to ask, and the king has to be the one who answers it." "What question?" "The one she asked me and I wouldn't answer," Weir said. "Why, not why the door is shut. Why it was shut like this, with a condition, with the crown prince named, with an age set, sealed by the king's own hand in the worst month of his life. There's a reason a grieving man does a thing that precise, Rook. Precise isn't grief. Precise is a promise. She thinks she's fighting my sentiment. She's fighting his promise, and she doesn't know it yet." He finally turned his head a fraction and looked at me, and there was something in his face I had not seen there before, not fear, but the weight of a man who knows he is carrying something that is not only his own. "And I'm not going to be the one who tells her what it is. It's not mine to tell, but I'm going to make sure the man whose promise it is gets the chance to." I did not understand all of that then. I understood it by nightfall. But standing there in the mist, all I understood was that Weir had staked his post, his name, and every year of service he had left on a locked green door, and that he had done it not out of stubbornness, but out of a certainty I could not yet see the bottom of. And I understood that the storm was not over. It had only walked back down the lane to fetch the king. We stood the rest of the watch. Nothing else came up the lane that day, but I will tell you what came up the lane the next morning, because it was worse than the Queen, and it nearly finished us both before the truth ever got its chance to be heard. What came up the lane the next morning was Lord Cassius. You may not know the name, so I will tell you what you need. Cassius was the Queen Consort's son from a marriage before her marriage to the king, a young man of perhaps 28, handsome in the way that a well-made blade is handsome, with none of his mother's patience and all of her appetite. Where Morwenna closed her hand slowly, Cassius grabbed. Where she wrapped every ambition in reason, he did not bother. He had grown up being given things, and he had never learned that some things must be asked for. He had come, plainly, at his mother's direction, but he had come in his own temper, and the two together made him more dangerous than either alone. He arrived not in a motor car, but on a tall gray horse, with two of the Queen Consort's household men on foot behind him, and he rode up the wet lane as though he meant to ride straight through the green door and out the other side. He reined in a few paces from us, and looked down at Weir from the height of the horse, which is a thing men do when they want to feel larger than they are. "You're the sergeant," he said. It was not a question. "The one who kept my mother standing in the rain like a beggar at her own door." "I am Sergeant Weir, my lord," Weir said. "The Queen Consort was not kept in the rain. She chose to stay and speak, and then she chose to leave. The door was closed to her the whole time as it is closed to you." "Is it?" said Cassius, and he swung down off the horse badly in a temper so that one of the household men had to catch the reins, and he came to stand very close to Weir, closer than his mother had, close enough that I moved my own weight forward without quite deciding to. "You listen to me, old man. My mother is willing to play the long game. She'll go to the king, she'll be gracious, she'll let the house chew it over for a week. I'm not so patient. I don't like being made to look small, and you made her look small, which is the same as making me look small, and I've come to open this door and put an end to it. Give me the key." "There is no key I can give you, my lord." "There's a key on that door and a lock behind it, and you have both. Give me the key, or I'll take it, and then we'll see what a sergeant's word is worth against a man of the house." Now, I have to be careful here to tell you exactly what happened, because this is the part where a lesser story would have Weir strike him, and Weir did not strike him, and the not striking is the whole of what made Weir the man he was. Because Cassius, having worked himself into it, reached out and took a fistful of the front of Weir's tunic, took hold of the red wool over the metals, and shoved him back against the green door hard enough that the old wood boomed, and Weir let himself be shoved. He did not resist it, and he did not answer it. He came off the door, straightened his tunic with 2 fingers, and stood exactly where he had been standing, between Cassius and the door, and he said, in a voice that had not risen by a single degree, "My lord, you have laid hands on a guard of the house at his post. I will not lay hands on you, because you are a member of the house and I am not, and I know the difference between us even if you have forgotten it. But I will tell you what will happen if you do it again. My corporal here is a witness, and there are your mother's 2 men, who are also witnesses whether they like it or not. And an assault on a posted guard is not a thing the house can pretend it did not see, no matter whose son does it. You may take my life if you're set on it. I'm an old man and I'll not stop you. But you will not take this key, because I do not have one to give, and you will not open this door, because it does not open on rage. Now step back, my lord, and let us both keep what dignity the morning has left us." I have thought about those words many times. What undid Cassius was not force. It was that Weir refused to make it a fight between 2 men, and made it instead a thing witnessed by the whole house, a thing that would follow Cassius wherever he went. A young man who is throwing his weight around wants a brawl, because a brawl is between equals and can be won. What he cannot stand is to be told, quietly, in front of servants, that he is behaving like exactly the spoiled boy everyone privately believes him to be, and that it is being written down. Cassius stood there with his fists still half clenched, and I watched the calculation go across his face. The same calculation his mother had made on the lane, only cruder and slower, and I watched him understand that if he struck the old man now, it would not be a victory. It would be the story of a lord who beat a 50-year-old guard at a garden door, and that story would outrun any door he could open. He let go, he stepped back. But he could not leave it clean because he was not made that way, so he said loudly for the household men to carry back, "You'll be gone by the week's end, Sergeant, order or no order. My mother will see the king, and there will be a new man on this door, and he'll open it in an afternoon, and everyone will remember that you made a scene over a shut-up cottage full of a dead woman's dust. That's your legacy. That's what you'll be. The mad old guard of the empty house." And he mounted, badly again and rode back down the lane, and his mother's men trailed after him, and Weir and I were alone once more. I found that my own hands were not quite steady. "Sergeant," I said, "he had you against the door." "If he'd struck you." "He didn't. But if he had, then I'd have stood there and let him, and it would have been the best thing that happened to us all week," Weir said, and there was the ghost of something grim in his voice. "A struck guard is a wronged guard, Rook. The house would have had to answer it. He's cleverer than his mother thinks, though. He stopped in time. Pity." And then more quietly, "But he told us one true thing in all that noise. She's going to the king, and when she goes, she'll have shaped it already, the mad old guard of the empty house. That's the story she'll tell. She's good at stories." He looked at the green door, at the drawn curtains, at the moss on the slate above. "So the truth has to be better than her story, and the truth can't come from me. If I stand in front of the king and say, there is an order, and I know why it exists, I'm exactly the man she says I am, the servant who's decided he's the guardian of the shrine. The why has to come from the one man in the house who can't be doubted about it. It has to come from him." "From the king." "From the king," Weir said. "Or it doesn't come at all and she wins, and this door opens next week, and everything that was promised at it is broken, and no one but me and a dead queen will ever know what was lost." He was quiet a moment. "That's the part I can't fix by standing here, Rook. I can hold the door with my body. I can't make the king remember in front of the whole house a promise he made in the dark of his grief and has spent 5 years not speaking of, because speaking of it hurts too much. That's the thing that's out of my hands. I can only make sure the door is still shut when the moment comes for him to remember, if it comes." That night I did a thing I had not been asked to do. I went to the registry myself. I did not have Weir standing to be there, but the clerk knew my face and let me in, and I found the plain book of standing orders, and I turned the pages back 5 years to the raw month after Queen Isolde died, and I found it. It was real. It was exactly as he had said, a short entry in a firm, grieving hand, the king's own, placing Aldergrove Cottage under a standing protection, closing it to all the house save the king himself in person or under his own seal, and the crown prince Rowan upon his reaching an age the entry named, and no other on no other authority, for no reason to be given. And beneath it in the same hand, a single line that I copied out and carried with me, because it was the first crack of light I had into what any of this was about. The line said, "What is kept here is kept for Rowan and Alara by their mother's word and mine, and is not the house's to spend. By their mother's word and mine." That was Queen Isolde's word he meant, a word given by a dying woman and answered by the man who loved her, sealed into the standing orders of the guard so that it could not be quietly undone. I sat with that line in the lamplight for a long time. I did not yet know what was kept in the cottage, but I knew now that it was not dust, and it was not sentiment, and it was not Weir's shrine. It was a promise made between a dying queen and a living king, over the heads of 2 children, and Morwenna, clever, patient, reasonable Morwenna, was about to walk straight into it without knowing it was there. I told Weir the next morning what I had found and what the last line said. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You shouldn't have gone, but I'm glad you did. Now you understand why I can't be the one to say it. It's not my promise, Rook, it's theirs. If I speak it, I've spent it. The only man who can spend it without breaking it is the man who made it, and only if he chooses to in front of everyone of his own will. All I can do is keep the door shut long enough that he gets the chance to choose." He looked down the lane where the mist was lifting off the fields. "And I'll tell you the truth, I don't know if he will. Grief makes men hide things even from themselves. He may have buried that promise so deep that when she brings her reasonable, gracious case, he'll let the door open just to have peace and never let himself remember why it shouldn't. That's what frightens me, not her, him. That he'll have forgotten his own promise, and I'll be the only one left who remembers it, and there's nothing a guard can do with a promise but stand at the door of it." 3 days passed. Nothing came up the lane, But the house, I learned from the guardroom talk, was filling up with Morwenna's version. The mad old sergeant of the empty house, the proud man who kept the queen in the rain, the servant who invented a scripture. It ran ahead of the truth exactly as Weir had said it would, and it gathered weight. And by the fourth day, even men of our own company were looking at Weir a little sideways, wondering if the old man had finally cracked on a still post, the way still posts crack men. He stood the door every day and said nothing to any of it. And I began to be afraid, truly afraid, that he was right, that a locked door and a 5-year-old line in a book would not be enough against a story that good, and that the king would let the door open just to be done with it, and never remember why he had shut it in the first place. Then on the 5th day a rider came up the lane at speed, and it was neither the queen nor her son. It was a summons. Weir was to attend the king, not at the great house in the long gallery before the assembled house at noon the following day. The queen consort had brought her complaint, and the king had chosen to hear it in the open, with everyone watching. She had gotten exactly the stage she wanted, and Weir was to answer for the shut door in front of the whole court. "Well," Weir said when the rider had gone, folding the summons once and putting it inside his tunic, "she's braver than I thought, or surer of him than I am. In the open, everyone watching." He almost smiled. "That's the one gamble I couldn't have made, and she made it for me. If it were done in a private room, the king could let the door open quietly and no one would ever ask why. In the open, he'll have to give a reason, in front of everyone." He looked at me. "She's put the one question I couldn't force him to ask right in the middle of the floor, Rook, and she doesn't even know she's done it. She wanted a stage to break me on. She's built the stage where he'll either remember his promise or break it in front of the whole house." He was quiet. "Tomorrow we find out which." The long gallery of the great house is the grandest room in the house of Harrogate, a hall the length of a bowling green, hung with the portraits of the line, floored in a wood so old and so polished that it holds the tall windows in it like a second row of light. It is where the house gathers when the house means to be seen gathering. And at noon the next day it was full. Courtiers along the walls, the ministers of the household, the officers of the guard, the ladies and lords of the inner court, and at the far end on the low dais, King Alaric in a plain dark coat, with the queen consort seated at his right hand in a gown the color of old wine, composed and gracious and entirely at her ease. I was permitted to stand near the door with the other guardsmen. Weir was brought up the center of the hall, alone, under the eyes of the whole house, and he walked it the way he stood a post, unhurried, level, his eyes forward, and I watched the courtiers watch him, and I saw in their faces exactly what Morwenna had planted there. Here is the mad old guard of the empty house, come to answer for his pride. He stopped at the proper distance from the dais and bowed his head the proper degree and stood, and the hall went quiet, and the king looked at him a long moment before he spoke. "Sergeant Weir," said King Alaric. His voice was low and even, a tired voice, the voice of a man who has been brought a quarrel he did not want on a day he did not choose. "You know why you are here?" "I do, your majesty." "The queen consort tells me that some days past you refused her entry to Aldergrove Cottage, that she came with a written instruction under her household seal, that it was placed in your hand, and that you would not step aside and would not open the door, and told her the door would open on no authority but mine or the crown prince's. She tells me you cited a standing order. She tells me," and here the king's eyes moved just slightly, and I understood he was watching Weir very carefully, "that no such order exists, or that if it exists it is a scrap from a grieving month long forgotten, never meant to bar my own household. She asks that you be removed from your post for refusing the crown, and that the cottage be opened, and that the house be spared any more scenes at a shut door." He paused. "That is her account. Before I answer it, I will hear yours. Did you refuse her?" "I did, your majesty." A stir went through the hall. To confess it, flatly in the open, the courtiers had expected excuses and got a plain yes, and it unsettled them. "You had her written instruction in your hand," the king said, under her seal. I did, your majesty. And I did not open the door, because her seal is not one of the two authorities the standing order names, and I hold that post under the standing order and not under my own judgment. If I had opened the door on her seal, I would have broken the order I am sworn to. I refused her, your majesty, the way a man refuses to hand over the keys of a thing he was set to keep, not against the crown, but for it. Morwenna spoke then, gently from the king's right hand, and the whole hall turned to her, because her voice was the reasonable one and everyone wanted the relief of reasonableness after Weir's flat, hard yeses. You see, Alaric, she said, using his name softly, a wife's privilege. He does not even deny it. He is proud of it. He speaks of the door as a thing he was set to keep, as though he and not you were the master of it. This is what I mean. A good servant once, no doubt. But grief for the late queen has made him her guardian in his own mind, and he has mistaken a shut cottage for a sacred trust, and now he defies the living to serve the dead. I hold nothing against the man. I only say that a door which will not open for the king's own wife, on the word of one old sergeant, cannot be allowed to stand. Whatever paper he found in some book, and I do not doubt he found something 5 years ago in the worst month any of us knew, it was written in grief, and it was never meant for this, and you, my husband, are surely not bound by a line you scarcely remember setting down. Open the cottage. Retire the sergeant with honor if you like, I'll not begrudge him a pension. But end this. It has gone on long enough, and it makes the house look foolish, quarreling with itself over a moss-covered roof. It was, again, beautifully done. And this was the false dawn, the moment I had been dreading because I watched the king's face and I saw the temptation cross it, the temptation to take the easy, reasonable, gracious way out that his wife was holding open for him. He was tired. He was a widower who had remarried, standing between a dead wife and a living one in front of the whole house, and everything in Morwenna's account offered him peace. It's only a cottage, it's only grief. The sergeant is a good man who has gone a little strange. Retire him kindly and open the door and be done. I saw the king draw a breath as though to agree. And I saw, in the center of the hall, Weir go very still, stiller than I had ever seen him, because he saw it too. He saw the king about to take the easy road and never remember why the road had been closed. And then Weir did the one thing he had said he would never do. He spoke without being asked. Your Majesty, he said, and his voice cut across the hall, low but carrying, I ask your pardon for speaking out of turn. I will take whatever comes of it. But before you answer the Queen Consort, I ask you one thing and one thing only. I ask you to read the standing order yourself, not to take my account of it nor Her Majesty's. To read the entry in the King's own hand in your own hand, your Majesty, the whole of it, including the last line. I have not spoken the last line to anyone. It is not mine to speak, but it is yours, your Majesty. Read your own last line, and then decide whether the man who wrote it meant it for grief, or meant it for something a king does not get to forget. The hall was utterly silent. Morwenna's composure did not crack, but I saw her eyes move quickly to the king and then to Weir, and I understood that she had not expected this. She had expected to fight a paper against her voice, and instead the sergeant had thrown the paper into the king's own hands and asked him to read what he himself had written. She could out-argue Weir. She could not out-argue the king's own hand. King Alaric looked at Weir for a long, long moment, and then he said to the steward of the household, Bring the registry of standing orders, the plain book. Now, Morwenna's hand moved on the arm of her chair. Alaric, she said softly, surely there is no need. There is need, the king said, and it was the first time all day his voice had come out of the tiredness and into something else. He has asked me to read my own hand. I will not refuse a man that. If it is a scrap of grief, we will all see that it is, and I will open the cottage, and the sergeant will have made his scene for nothing and answer for it. But I will read it first. And the hall waited. In a silence you could have walked on, while a runner was sent and came back, and the plain book of standing orders was carried up the length of the gallery and placed in the hands of the king. I watched him find the page. I watched from the door his eyes go down it. And I watched the change come over King Alaric's face as he read, a change I have never forgotten and could not have invented, because it was not the face of a man discovering a scrap of forgotten grief. It was the face of a man remembering, all at once and against his will, a thing he had built a whole life around not remembering. His hand, holding the book, was not steady. He read it once, and then he read it again, slower, and when he came the second time to the last line, the line I had copied out in the registry by lamplight, the line that said what is kept here is kept for Rowan and Alara by their mother's word and mine, and is not the house's to spend, I saw him close his eyes. The hall did not understand. The courtiers along the walls saw only that the king had gone pale over an old book, and they murmured and shifted, and Morwenna, sensing the ground move under her without knowing which way, said again, more urgently, "Alaric, it is only grief. You can see it is only grief." "Be still," said the king. He did not say it cruelly. He said it the way a man says a thing when he is holding on to himself with both hands, and Morwenna went still, because there are two words a king can say to a queen in front of the whole house, and "be still," said in that voice, is one of the ones that ends the argument. The hall held its breath, and King Alaric closed the plain book and set it down on the arm of the dais, and sat for a moment with his hand flat upon it, gathering something. And then he looked up, not at Weir, not at first, but at the far door, and he said, in a different voice than any he had used that day, "Where is my son? Where is the crown prince? Is he in the house?" A gentleman of the court stepped forward and said the crown prince Rowan was in the house, that he had come for the hearing. "Send for him," the king said, "and send for the Princess Alara, both of them, now." And then at last he looked down the hall at Weir, and I will tell you that there were tears standing in the old king's eyes in front of the whole assembled house, and he did not hide them. "Sergeant," he said, "you have made me remember a thing I have spent 5 years refusing to say aloud. And you have done it in front of everyone so that I cannot unremember it or bury it again. I do not know yet whether to thank you or to curse you, but I know now what door you were standing." He drew a breath. "We will wait for my children, and when they come, I will tell the whole house what is kept at Aldergrove Cottage, and why a dying queen and a grieving king sealed it against the world. And then we will all know whether Sergeant Weir was a mad old man protecting a shrine, or the last honest keeper of a promise I did not have the courage to keep myself." And the hall waited, and the queen consort sat very still in her wine-dark gown, and I stood at the door with my heart going like a drum, because we had come at last to the edge of the thing, and in a moment the reason that stunned everyone, was going to walk out into the light of the long gallery and stand where all of us could see it. They came together, the crown prince Rowan and the princess Alara, up the length of the gallery. Rowan was perhaps 20 now, grown tall and grave, and Alara a year or two younger, with the late queen's dark eyes. I had heard the old servants say she had her mother's eyes, and standing there I saw it was true. They did not know what they had been summoned for. I could see it in the way they walked, the wariness of young people brought before the whole house on an hour's notice. They stopped before the dais and bowed to their father, and the king rose from his chair to receive them, which is a thing a king does not do lightly, and the hall stirred at it. "My children," King Alaric said, "I have kept a thing from you for 5 years. I told myself I kept it to spare you. That was not entirely true. I kept it because to speak of it was to feel your mother die again, and I was a coward about my own grief, and I let a shut door do my remembering for me." He looked at them, one and then the other. "You remember Aldergrove Cottage. You were small, but you remember it, the brook, the garden, the summers your mother took you there. You have both asked me over the years why it was closed, and I gave you soft answers, and you let me. Today I am going to give you the true one, because a sergeant of my guard held that door against my own wife rather than let a promise be broken that even I had half let go of, and I will not let his honor be worth less than my cowardice." He turned then, and he addressed the whole hall, and his voice steadied as he spoke, as though the saying of it, finally, was easier than the years of not saying it. "I will tell all of you what is kept at Aldergrove Cottage. And then no one in this house will ever again call it a shut-up cottage full of a dead woman's dust." The hall was so quiet I could hear the tall windows tick in the wind. "In the last months of her life," the king said, "when the Queen Isolde knew she was dying and knew our children would grow up without her, she did a thing I did not fully understand at the time and understood only slowly after she was gone. She spent those months writing, not one letter, not a farewell, years of them. She wrote to Rowan and to Alara, one letter for each of them, sealed and dated, to be given to them not at once, not in the raw grief of losing her when they were too young to keep them, but across the whole length of their growing up. A letter for each birthday she would not live to see, a letter for the day Rowan would take up the duties of the crown, a letter for the day Alara would marry if she chose to marry, and one for the day she chose not to, if she chose not to. Letters for the ordinary days and the great ones, the first grief, the first triumph, the first time each of them would have to make a hard decision alone and wish their mother were there to ask. She wrote a mother's whole remaining life into those letters, all the counsel and the comfort and the love she would not be alive to give in person. And she asked me, she made me promise, at her bed, with her hand in mine, that they would be kept safe and given out at their proper times over the years, so that our children would never wholly lose their mother's voice as they grew. That she could go on being their mother from inside a locked room in a garden cottage, one letter at a time, long after she was gone. The king's voice did not break, but it was a near thing, and I saw more than one hard-faced courtier along the wall put a hand to their mouth. "That is what is kept at Aldergrove Cottage," he said. "Not dust, not jewels, not a shrine. A dead queen's living voice, years of it set aside for her children and sealed against the whole house by her word and mine, so that no one could open it early or lose it, or read what was never meant for their eyes, or decide, for reasons of their own, that the letters were better disposed of than kept. I sealed that door in the standing orders of the guard, in my own hand in the worst month of my life, because I knew that grief fades and ambition does not, and that someday, years on, someone would come to that cottage with a reasonable voice and a good excuse, and want it opened, for restoration, for use, for the house, and there would be no one left who remembered what a shut door was really keeping. I said it so that only I, or Rowan when he came of age to be trusted with his mother's whole heart at once, could ever open it, and then I spent 5 years pretending I had forgotten, because remembering hurt more than I could bear." He looked then down the hall at the still, gray figure standing alone in the center of the floor, and a sergeant of my guard remembered for me, held the door for me, refused my own wife at it, and took the whole house calling him mad for a week, rather than let a dead queen's voice be spent on a moss-covered roof and a restoration. Sergeant Weir, you did not know what was in those letters. You had never read a word of them. You held that door on nothing but the order and the last line of it, and the trust that a king who wrote what is kept here is kept for Rowan, and Alara meant every word. You were right, and I was the coward, and I will not forget it. I want to tell you what happened to the hall in that moment, because it was a thing I had never seen and have never seen since. There was no cheering. The house does not cheer at such a moment. It is too grave for cheering. But there was a sound, a low sound, the sound of 200 people letting out a breath they had been holding, and turning all together to look at the gray old sergeant in the middle of the floor, the man they had spent a week calling mad, and I watched the story on all those faces turn over in an instant. From here is the proud old fool to here is the one honest man among us, and it was like watching the tide go out. And Princess Alara, who had her mother's dark eyes, put her hand over her face and wept openly, and did not care who saw, because she understood in a way none of the courtiers could that there was a letter in that cottage for the day she married, and one for the day she chose not to, and one for the first hard decision she would ever have to make alone, that her mother had known she would grow up and had refused to be entirely gone from it, and that a stranger in a red tunic had stood in the rain and been called a madman to keep that gift whole for her. And Morwenna sat in her wine-dark gown at the king's right hand, and I made myself look at her because I wanted to see it. She did not weep. She was not the weeping kind. But I watched the whole careful architecture of her come down at once, the reasonable voice, the gracious case, the mad old guard of the empty house, because there is no reasonable case in the world that survives what the king had just said. She had brought a complaint that a proud servant was keeping the king's wife from a garden cottage. And it had turned, in front of the entire house, into the story of a woman who had come with keys and a surveyor and an appraiser to open the room where a dying mother's letters to her children were kept, the woman who would have been the one to spend them. It did not matter that she had not known. It did not matter that she would have said, if you'd asked her, that she meant no harm to any letters. The picture was made now in every mind in that hall, and it could not be unmade. Morwenna at the green door, keys in her gloved hand, and behind the door unread, a dead queen's voice and one old man's body between the two. She understood it. I will give her that. She understood in that moment that she had lost far more than a cottage that she had spent in 1 week of patient, reasonable pressure, whatever standing she had ever built in the eyes of the house, and that no gracious voice would ever buy it back, because the house had now seen the shape of her under the grace and would not unsee it. But it was not over yet, because a woman like Morwenna at the very bottom of a fall will always reach for the one handhold left, and there was one handhold left, and she took it. She rose from her chair, the whole hall turning to her now, and she said, in a voice she made every effort to keep even, I did not know. I swear before the house I did not know what the cottage held. Had I known, I would never, the sergeant might simply have told me. And here is the last thing, and I think it is the truest thing in the whole of what happened, and it did not come from the king. It came from the Crown Prince Rowan, who had stood silent through all of it with his jaw set, and who now spoke for the first time quietly, but in a voice that carried to every corner of that hall. He could not have told you, madam, Rowan said. Don't you see it even now? That is the whole of it. If the door opened to anyone who could be told, anyone reasonable, anyone gracious, anyone with a good enough excuse, then my mother's letters were safe from no one, and the promise was worth nothing. The only door that could keep them was a door that did not open to reasons at all, not to the best reason in the world. Not to grief, not to restoration, not to the house, not to the queen consort, not to anyone but my father in person or me, when I am judged ready to hold my mother's whole heart at once. He looked at Weir, and then at his father, and then, last, at Morwenna. A man who would have opened the door if only you had explained yourself well enough, that man would have been useless. The only guard worth having on that door was one who would not open it for any explanation on earth. And so when you say the sergeant might simply have told you and stepped aside, you are describing exactly the failure my mother sealed that door to prevent. He let that stand. He did not refuse you because he distrusted you, madam. He refused you because he was the door, and the door was made to refuse. That is not his shame. It is the whole of his honor. And it is the reason my mother's voice is still whole for me to hear, one letter at a time, for the rest of my life. I will not forget who kept it. There was nothing left to be said after that, and Morwenna, to her small credit, did not try to say it. She sat down. And King Alaric, standing on the dais with his hand still resting on the plain book of standing orders, looked out over the hall, and then down at the gray old sergeant, and made the judgment that everyone was waiting for. Let it be entered in the record of this house, the king said, that the complaint against Sergeant Halloran Weir is dismissed in every particular. He did not defy the crown. He upheld it against my own household, against my own wife, and I will say it plainly, so that it is written down, against my own cowardice, for I had let a promise fall into silence that this man held whole with nothing but his body and his word. There is no fault in him to answer for. There is a debt in me to pay." He paused, and I saw him choose his next words with great care, because a king's words in the open become law by being spoken. "The standing order on Aldergrove Cottage stands unaltered. It will not be softened, nor amended, nor set aside, now or after I am gone. The door opens for me, or for the crown prince at the age his mother named, and for no other, on no seal, for no reason, however good. That was her word and mine, and it will hold." He looked at his son. "Rowan, you are not yet of the age the order names, but the age is not far off, and when it comes, the letters are yours and Alara's, to be given out at their proper times as your mother wished, one at a time, across your whole lives. Until then they wait, behind a door that will not open to the best reason in the world, as she meant." Then he did a thing that I think mattered more than any of the rest, because it was small, and a king's small acts are the ones the house remembers longest. He came down off the dais. He walked the length of the gallery himself, past the courtiers, past the ministers, past his own silent wife, until he stood in front of Sergeant Weir, and he was close enough that the whole hall could see there was nothing hidden in it. And he said, so that all could hear, "I asked you at the door of my own, remembering whether to thank you or to curse you. I know the answer now. Thank you, Sergeant. You kept my wife's voice safe from me, from my own weakness, until I was strong enough to be told. There is no honor in my gift that is higher than what you did on nothing but an order and your trust in a dead queen's word. But I will give you what I can." He turned to the assembled house. "Sergeant Weir will keep the door of Aldergrove Cottage for as long as he wishes to keep it. No man will relieve him of that post but himself. And when the day comes that he lays it down, he will name the man who takes it after him, for I would sooner trust the choice of that door to him than to any officer in my household. Let it be so." "Let it be so," the officers of the guard answered all together, and it went round the hall like a bell. I looked at Weir through all of it, and I will tell you that he did not weep, and he did not smile, and he did not draw himself up any taller than he had stood all along. He bowed his head to the king the exact proper degree, and he said only, "I will keep it, your majesty," and that was all. The man who would not be moved by an arrogant lord or a reasonable queen was not going to be moved by his own vindication either. It was the most in-character thing I ever saw him do. That is nearly the whole of it. There are a few small things left to tell, and then I am done. Morwenna did not fall from her place all at once. The house does not work that way, and a queen consort is not so easily unseated. But she was never again the reasonable, gracious voice the house had listened to for an hour and come away warmed. The picture had been made of her, in the long gallery, and it followed her. The woman at the green door with the surveyor and the appraiser and the keys, and behind the door the letters she would have spent. Doors closed to her quietly after that, the way she had once closed her own hand slowly on the late queen's things not seized, just no longer offered. Her son, Lord Cassius, left the house within the season, and was not much spoken of again. And the slow taking apart of Queen Isolde's memory that Morwenna had been about, the jewels and the horses and the portraits and the placement of a name in the chapel prayers, simply stopped, because the house had seen at last what it was, and would not lend its hands to any more of it. I do not think we are set out to save the late queen's whole memory. He set out to hold one door. But holding that one door turned out to be the thing that turned the tide on all the rest, and I have thought since that this is how it usually goes, that the great wrongs are turned back not by great gestures, but by one man refusing to move at one door on one gray morning. The Crown Prince Rowan came of the age the order named, in time. I was there, I had risen by then, and I stood the honor guard. The morning King Alaric and his son walked up the lane of lime trees together, and Sergeant Weir, gray now to white, opened the green door for them with his own key at last, and stood aside and let them pass. I do not know what was in the letters. It was not mine to know. But I saw the young man's face when he came out again some hours later, and it was the face of a son who had heard his mother's voice for the first time in years, telling him a thing he had needed to be told, and I understood then, fully, all at once, what Weir had held that door for. Some gifts can only be kept by refusing every hand that reaches for them, however gently. That is a hard thing to be. Weir was it. He kept the door of Aldergrove Cottage to the end of his service, as the king had said he might, and when at last he laid it down, he named the man who would take it after him, and I will not pretend I was not proud. The man he named was me. "You went to the registry the one night it mattered, Rook," he told me, "and read the last line and understood it. That's the whole of the job. Understand what the door is really keeping and refuse every reasonable voice that comes to open it early. It's not a hard post. It's just the one most men can't hold." And he handed me the key, and he walked down the lane of lime trees one final time, unhurried, level, his eyes forward, the way he had walked the whole length of the long gallery on the worst morning of his life, and I never saw him prouder than I saw him that plain last day, which was not proud at all, which was only a man who had kept his word. I stand that door now. I have stood it many years, and I will tell you what I tell the young corporals who come up beside me and ask, as I once asked, why a garden cottage a mile and a half from the great house should want a guard at all, when there is nothing behind the door but old letters and drawn curtains and moss on the slate. I tell them what Weir told me. I tell them that the still posts are the ones that break a man, and that this is the stillest post in the house, and that its whole honor is in one thing only, that the door does not open for the best reason in the world, not for a lord in a temper, not for a queen with a reasonable voice and a good excuse and keys already in her gloved hand, not for anyone but the two the order names, at the times the order names, because a dying mother once asked a grieving king to let her go on being a mother from inside a locked room, one letter at a time, for the whole length of her children's lives, and because a gray old sergeant who had never read a word of those letters stood in the rain and let the whole house call him mad rather than let that promise be spent. His reason stunned everyone that morning in the long gallery, but the truth is it was the simplest reason in the world and the hardest to live by, and I have spent my life since trying to be worthy of standing where he stood. The door does not open on a seal or a temper or a good excuse. It opens on a promise, and a guard is only the promise standing up in the shape of a man who will not move. That is the whole of it. That is why I would not, and Weir would not, and no keeper of that green door ever will. Some things are kept by refusing. He taught me that at Aldergrove Cottage on a gray morning at the tail of autumn, and I have kept it, the way he kept the door with nothing but my body and my word, and the trust that a dead queen's last wish was worth every year it cost to hold.